for those joining us live and those watching on YouTube, I just want to say welcome and thanks for taking the time to join us today and hear about Fortis X, which is a great example of a bioplastics company working in South Africa. I'm going to hand over to Nick, so you can take it away when you're ready.
Tara, well, thank you so much for having me here today, and I really appreciate the time to present a little bit about what we do, what we're about, some of the solutions that we're bringing to market, as well as some of the challenges that are involved there as well. But let me go to sharing the screen. Super, yeah. So we're Fortis X, and what our company does is that we produce various articles and items that used to be plastic based. We produce them entirely out of sugarcane plants. Beyond that, we have compostable products as well. So we have both plant-based and biodegradable options. The sort of reason why we got into this, just to give you a bit of background, you'll see now in the timeline, is that we used to produce and still do produce a lot of items that have traditionally been made from plastic. We then converted to doing something that we believe is more sustainable, and we'll definitely unpack that in greater detail. Why do we call it sustainable? What are the alternatives out there? And what's happening currently? So just to continue, our vision is to supply sustainable alternatives in the world of depleting natural resources. What do I mean by that? Is that fossil fuels, so in terms of coal, in terms of crude oil, these are finite. We only have so much of it left and available on our planet. And certainly to have something that is annually renewable, we believe is the solution for generations to come, instead of relying on a finite source. So our mission is to utilize bio-based resources to increase the potential for pollution reduction. And that really is the key behind it. We're focusing on something, again, that is annually renewable and has the potential to not devastate the planet in the process. So just a little bit more about us. We started a medical supplies company in 2009. Most of those items were heavily based on single-use medical plastics, things like silicone and acetyl, which are medical grade for surgery. That's really where we started. We still distribute to private and public hospitals across South Africa, and then as well as public hospitals. We then began with various kinds of moldings in 2017, and beyond that, we decided to launch South Africa's very first product made entirely from plants. So we are the manufacturer, so any other distributors that are holding packaging, especially bottles that are made of plants, we do provide to every distributor in the country. So, you know, we produce mostly the bottles, and I'm not sure if you can see my camera. I think you can, but we produce bottles entirely out of sugarcane plants. So bottle and cap is not made using plastic, but entirely sugarcane. We also produce certain agricultural products, which are tubes that are used for insectaries in farming and agriculture. Those always used to be plastic, and now they are sugarcane based. So we've decided to switch from conventional plastic to biopolymers, and that did come from our customers. Our customers felt that originally we used to use too much plastic, so we thought instead of carrying on and on about recycling, let's rather fix the problem and actually do something about it. So that's where we are at the moment. Of course, something that you'll see all the time is that the media regulates the impact of wildlife suffering. At the moment, we have the COP26 conference that's happening in Glasgow, which once again brings together world leaders to really stress the importance of climate change, what we're doing to the planet, and our need for hopefully more sustainable alternatives. Legislation has also started changing in many places. So just before we went live now, Tara and I were discussing the first African country actually was Rwanda. They decided to ban single-use plastic. And as a result, very few options were available. Sometimes people use glass when it comes to bottles, but of course, glass is very expensive. It uses a lot of energy and it breaks very easily. Something that the audience might or might not know is when PET plastic is in a landfill, over time, as it sort of beats down with weather, and I mainly mean in terms of rain, eventually you get a toxic substance which we call leachate, and that's been proven to actually poison the soil. I put the reference here at the bottom of the slide so you can look that up, but absolutely scientific evidence to prove that there is leachate from standard plastic into soils and surrounding environments. That being said, global plastic production is on the rise. Gaia and others and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is able to give us reasonably concrete numbers in terms of how much plastic we're consuming globally. And we know that absolutely by now we're beyond the 350 million tons mark of plastic consumed per annum. And then if we look at to subdivide again, where is that being used mostly? It is being used mostly in the packaging sector. So that was also one of the reasons why we decided to focus on packaging, and in our case, of course, specifically bottles. And then again, just from another source for you, we're definitely now beyond the 350 million tons mark being consumed annually. And then again, just from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which this topic is sort of very close to their heart. We know that it's about 43 billion bottles that are sold every month. How much bottled water is consumed? Also, just so you understand a little bit why we went this route, we understand that there were 378 billion liters consumed in 2017. So if you imagine if just one bottle was 1 liter, 378 billion. And of course, most people consume the 500 ml, so that's double the amount. In terms of the share of consumption of packaged beverages, we know that again, the bulk of it is in water, then alcoholic beverages, carbonated soft drinks, milk and dairy, and then onto juices. In Kenya, they've got quite a large market share in terms of their bottled water. So it's seen as a 1.7 billion rand market, and that's just obviously one country in Africa. So of course, as demand is increasing, because of course we still have population expansion, the consumption of single-use packaging will only increase, whether it's plastic, glass, biodegradable. It makes no difference in the sense of what the packaging is, but certainly the consumption and the demand is there, and it's growing at quite a rapid rate. Here in South Africa, we know that it's on average about 500 million bottles were sold in 2016. So obviously that's 5 years old data. We do not have renewed data at the moment, but obviously we anticipate that it is beyond that. And again, South Africa only contributing to the problem here, unfortunately. So why do we need bioplastics and biopolymers? From our opinion, we definitely believe that having something that can rapidly biodegrade is the solution. Something that we can measure from chemical half-life is that plastic takes on average about 400 years to break down. So you know, we're still finding bottles today, believe it or not, from World War One, and they will still continue to be around for the next 200 to 300 years. So that is, number one, it's a threat to wildlife. It is a threat to soil poisoning. And for us to have something that can rapidly biodegrade, for us, that is sort of the future, as well as not using the limited fossil reserves. And then, as we touched on earlier, legislation is changing. So some people are divided on the topic. Some people feel that maybe biodegradable packaging is not the best option. With that being said, every couple of months we see country upon country banning the single-use plastic. One question that comes up quite a bit is, so seeing that we use plant-based resources for packaging, aren't we taking away from the food reserves of the global population? Is there not a food scarcity issue then, if we're now using sugarcane to produce packaging and to produce bottles? So this was a study that was done by European Bioplastics. They're based in Berlin, in Germany, and they did this together with the Nova Institute. And what we can see here is what's predicted here for 2023 is that only 0.02% of agricultural land would be used for packaging. So at 0.02%, there's no significant impact on food scarcity. And then for us to bring it back home, a lot of you might know that KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa is sugar country, if we can call it that. We actually have a surplus in South Africa of sugarcane, to the extent that we were invited by the Department of Trade and Industry to try and use up sugarcane in Natal. We currently have about 11 million tons of extra sugarcane per annum that is not being sold, it's not being used. And of course, in the natural life cycle of a plant, that reaches a point when it needs to be harvested. It can be harvested, planted again, and then it continues to grow. So we've had all the major sugar producers of South Africa coming to Fortis X, asking us, please, can we buy more of their resin and their sugarcane, because they're actually suffering. And it's the case here in South Africa where, with sugar tax and imported sugar from Brazil, our sugar farmers and sugar industry is suffering with an oversupply, a surplus of excess sugar. So no impact then in terms of food scarcity, very sustainable, and something that we're looking at continuing with. The advantages then, by using bioplastics in general, bioplastics are mostly processed from cornstarch, which is the case in the United States. So in Nebraska, Nature Works produces their bioplastics from the cornstarch. Locally here, we're using the sugarcane, and it works out pretty well in terms of that. These are the production quantities here as well, with just over 1 billion metric tons of corn and 1.8 billion tons of extra sugarcane. And again, with South Africa being in a very special position, almost struggling with the amount of excess sugarcane we have. So obviously, if we say that our product can biodegrade and it can break down, we have to prove that. And that's proven in the laboratory Dinsertco. Dinsertco took bottles from Fortis X here in South Africa that we produce. They put it through all the laboratory testing according to the testing standards. There was no issue in getting the certificate. Again, it's made from plants, it can break down. This just proves it officially. And then on the right-hand side, you're seeing one of the local waste management companies, Y Waste, with Emil, who's a good friend of ours. He takes our bottles on a regular basis, and they break down pretty rapidly there. Just to show you some pictures of that actually happening, here's one of the trucks on the left. So in South Africa, we've got industrial composting. We actually have 3 industrial composters, and one of them being Reliance. Reliance have about 20 Superlink trucks on the road. as well as smaller vehicles, and they do compostable collections. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side here is bottles that we've received back. These are returns, and one of our guys are loading it up on the truck, and then on the left, the composting truck driver, just with one of our products. So at the moment, we send on close to 50,000 bottles per month for composting. There's also no impact to the soil and the compost itself. So that's something that's been studied very intrinsically to make sure that there's no damage to the environment around it. And the lactic acid actually is something that's rapidly absorbed in the soil and consumed by the microbial activity in the compost. So very exciting from that point of view to have something made from plants breaking down into compost and being used again in agriculture. In terms of plant-based packaging, there is another product which is called BioPET. Some people are not too familiar with it. And let me just unpack that for you for a moment. So a normal plastic bottle, which is PET, polyethylene terephthalate, it consists of MEG, which is monoethylene glycol, and terephthalic acid. The monoethylene glycol is always taken from crude oil. That's your standard plastic. It comes as a byproduct of crude oil, a byproduct of petroleum. With the bio-based PET, we get this component entirely from molasses. So that's sugarcane and molasses. That's not a biodegradable product, but it's a plant-based product. And we'll see just now, you know, we don't want everything just simply to disintegrate. There are a lot of products that we want to last longer. Then in terms of end of life of the packaging, something that's quite exciting is that you can burn the sugarcane product with no toxicity. And just to get into that a little bit, when sugarcane is refined, the sap or the juice that is removed from the sugarcane, that contains the sugar. Then you're left behind with the stalk we call bagasse. The bagasse can be thrown into an incinerator and used for energy. As a matter of fact, Umfolozi sugar in KwaZulu-Natal, they use the sugarcane stalk as an energy source. And they actually produce 10 megawatts of power, which actually powers the entire factory. So they're not affected by the load shedding. And that's something that works really well. Part of what Tara is doing is to really keep plastic out of the seas. And on that note, most cruise liners are fitted with incinerators on board the ships. These bottles are able to go into the ship's incinerator. They can burn, adding energy to the overall process. And there's no toxicity. So how do we measure toxicity? We measure something called VOCs. So we measure in the fumes coming out of the furnace. We measure the VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds. And the VOCs have to be below a certain level. And just out of interest, when you burn a product like this, it's at 1/10. So that's 10% of the acceptable maximum level for something to burn and go into the atmosphere. So it's a very clean burn, it's non-toxic, and it's accepted worldwide in terms of the VOCs. Point number 2 here is that it can be recycled with 99.9% detection and infrared sorting tech. So we see this in slightly more advanced countries in Europe. Norway, for example, has their entire waste management done by infrared. The infrared is able to determine the density of the product and thereby determining what product that is. So if with the infrared light, it picks up that it's a compostable sugarcane bottle, it will then sort that into the compostable packaging. Number 3 is that the packaging can be reused. So a question that we get a lot of the time is, you know, we're saying it biodegrades, but now does that mean I'm going to have it on my shelf and then it's just going to fade away? It's not going to fade away. You know, you'll get a reasonably good shelf life out of the product. When you are finished with the product, that is when we put it in compost, and the biodegradation happens quite rapidly. So in the picture here, you can see biodegradation happening after 90 days. That is in a low temperature compost heap. With some of the higher temperature compost heaps, like at Reliance, you will not even find these fragments in 30 days. So with a slightly higher heat compost pile, your biodegradation is a bit faster. Advantages with the BioPET. It is the only conventional plastic that's made with sugarcane. So in terms of bottles, there's nothing else like it. A lot of people ask us to try and use hemp. In Cape Town, we've got an interesting community where I think hemp is quite popular. And hemp, unfortunately, does not process on certain machines. So sugarcane has been the best, again, when we need something to be made with a plant-based resource. Point number 2 here that I say is that it is recyclable with the current PET and plastics. And I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more in the Q&A. But a bio-based PET bottle can recycle with standard oil-based PET with no problem. The chemical formula in the end is the same. It is also cost competitive while being greener. So we've noticed that, especially in Europe, that's gaining a lot of popularity. So competitive strengths that we have in our company is that we do manufacture locally, we don't import. So, you know, we don't attract import duties. We have a cost advantage then in terms of our pricing. As far as we understand, there are no other manufacturers of the bioplastic articles in South Africa. In 2018, the South African media announced Fortis X as the first company to be able to produce a biodegradable bottle. We've also partnered with, beyond what you've seen in the pictures, with Interwaste and EnviroServe, Waste Plan, and a couple of others. And we also are a distributor of some of these materials for 3D printing applications. So here in Berlin, we are part now of the European Bioplastics Association. So not only will we be attending conferences there now in Berlin, we will actually be setting up another factory in Germany quite soon. And that is also to provide our products into the European market, not from an export point of view, but from a local manufacturing point of view. Again, why should you choose Fortis X? We've sort of touched on it already, but we have multiple processes that we're able to do beyond bottles. So again, in terms of farming and agriculture, a lot of the agricultural customers already have a degree of industrial composting happening on the farm. So certainly for agriculture and for mining products, we're able to assist with very niche applications. We do manufacture the packaging, we stock the resins and compounds, and we believe that the pricing is also quite affordable. Again, our biodegradation is certified and proven. It's not something which is wishful thinking. It's something we've tested in the lab. We do it in practice on an industrial level here in South Africa. And we've also proven home compostability, where in your back garden, we can actually get the products to break down quite nicely. And that is my presentation. So thank you very much for having me here today. And we hope to hear from some of the audience members going forward.
Thank you so much, Nick. I don't see any questions that have come through yet in the chat, and you did happen to answer quite a few of mine as you went through. But I wanted to chat a little bit about the sort of carbon impact and your comments on that. Obviously, with COP26 happening over the last 2 weeks, it's very relevant, perhaps more now in the last 2 weeks than it typically should be throughout the year. Obviously, there are a lot of sort of trade-offs with plastic alternatives and things like that. If, you know, people produce glass or metal water bottles as opposed to a plastic one, there's obviously a significant carbon impact in terms of the weight, the transport, how many times you need to reuse it before it is in fact before it's worth the sort of emissions. you want to comment a little bit about the sort of the carbon impact of your product? Obviously, you mentioned that it's generally grown from local biomaterial, but do you want to comment on that at all?
So the company Corbion and Purac, they did an analysis between plastic production, glass production, and sugarcane compostable packaging. As it stands at the moment, we do have a lower carbon footprint. Again, you have to see the studies and reports for that, where it shows you all the line items from the energy production to the transport to the actual processing of sugarcane into resin, and then resin into an article. And what we know is from the analysis at the moment, the carbon footprint is lighter than plastic, and it's much lighter than glass because of the amount of energy used to produce glass products. But what's quite exciting is in the near future, a lot of the processes are going to be run on solar, which will actually give the product a negative carbon footprint. And negative carbon obviously is far better than net zero. Also makes Greta Thunberg's wishes come true. And it's definitely something that we want to attain to. You know, I mean, if you're following the COP26 at the moment, we can't just put wishful thinking and sort of nicer targets in place. We have to tackle the problem really head on. And so the fact that we're moving from being better than plastic in terms of a carbon footprint to a negative carbon output, it's just incredible, actually. Of course, a lot of the reason for that being by farming sugarcane and having more plant material being farmed, there's a greater reduction of CO2 by farming with plants. So from a carbon emissions and carbon footprint point of view, it is already better. And the fact that it's going to negative carbon in terms of its output is for us is just incredible. So that's on that side. I'm not sure if I missed anything else in your question there.
Okay, I don't believe you left anything out. Sorry. So in terms of the item selections that you have produced, can you elaborate a little bit about the specific products that you chose to manufacture? Obviously, as I know there are a number of reports that have looked at the fact that the extraction and refining and all that kind of thing of oil and raw material, that is has a significant carbon emission of sort of a plastic item. So obviously the bio-based option is certainly a sector that deserves a fair amount of attention. But in terms of its end of life processes, can you elaborate a little bit about why Fortis X chose to manufacture its specific products?
So in terms of the bottles, it's only ourselves and one other company in the world that are able to produce bottles from sugarcane. We felt that was quite significant. In the South African landscape, there's about 17 importers of compostable packaging, and they're all doing a fantastic job, each in their own right. The one item they never had, though, was a bottle. They've got takeaway packaging, they've got cups. I mean, we see the straws in Cape Town, we see it in almost every restaurant in Cape Town. You don't find plastic straws. So it was from a business point of view, we saw that bottles were definitely something that we desperately needed in South Africa from a more natural point of view. From the end of life, what you're mentioning there, we found that they're also a bit easier to collect, maybe. So our closed loop system is really fantastic in the sense that all the hotels and restaurants we supply give us the bottles back at the end of life, and then we ensure that goes to Reliance. Otherwise, some of them do home compost. We do have a few customers who live on a small holding or farm with a reasonable amount of land, and then they do the composting themselves. So that's sort of how we got onto bottles, especially seeing that there are none. So a lot of the distributors now that you'll see are stocking bottles. We do produce for the distributors. So
I see. And I certainly think that the closed loop system that you have, yeah, it ticks a few of the boxes in terms of potential hazards that compostable products can have, in the sort of assumption that just because something is capable of biodegrading or composting, it doesn't always necessarily mean it'll be given the opportunity to do so. But obviously, with the sort of the infrastructure that you have set up there and that kind of thing, it does, at least it certainly accounts for quite a bit of that. I see we have some comments in the chat and in the Q&A here. We have a question that says, is the industrial composting process by Waste and Reliance by including in windrows, and do the bottles have to be shredded first before inclusion?
So Reliance makes use of the windrows, and that works really well. Waste, they don't. But what you'll find quite interesting is even if you just had a small pile, and when I say small, I mean 1 meter by 1 meter for your home composting, that'll break down fairly rapidly. So home composting that we've tested in sort of a back garden environment was not shredded first, and we had complete biodegradation in 17 days. But that's also doing the composting correctly. By doing composting correctly, I don't mean that you need to use chemical activators. We're talking just green grass and brown leaves. Size can matter. So if you're doing a 1 meter by 1 meter, you're going to get quite a hot temperature. You're going to get to about 71 degrees if it's done properly. And that's something we tested without using any extra activators. You know, a lot of nurseries do sell activators. We don't believe in trying to use more chemicals, but that was pretty good. So in answering the question about shredding, you do not need to shred it. If you want to shred it, you will improve the biodegradation time.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you, Hugh, for the question. I'm assuming that would have to do with the surface area, the shredding, which just kind of increase the surface area.
It does help a lot. We actually had a customer recently that tried that just in their bokashi. If you're familiar with bokashi, it's a very nice type of bacteria-based compost product which comes in a black bin. Surprisingly, they also had very good results, which we were not too sure if they were going to get those results, because you need the reaction between nitrogen and carbon, which you're getting from the greens and the browns. And with the bokashi, you don't quite have that, but there is still carbon and nitrogen present.
Okay. And then I see we have another question here that says, do you produce a variety of products or only bottles? For example, Ziploc type bags or rubbish bags. And then there's a comment that says negative carbon output is fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that is really fantastic. In terms of the bags, that requires a different type of production that we don't do. So we do anything that's rigid. Flexible packaging is a whole different kettle of fish. It requires something called blow film extrusion. We don't do blow film extrusion at Fortis X, at least not yet. We were approached by the rubbish bag company Tuffy. Tuffy wanted to know if we could supply them. It's not something that we're doing at the moment. Bonnie Bio is one company that tried to really come to the table in terms of the flexible packaging. I'm not sure how well their bags work, but it sounds like they do a reasonably good job.
Okay. And then I see we have a comment in the chat here that says, what is the reaction of PROs to your products? And what symbol do you use for PLA bottles? Is there a danger that biodegradable bottles will get mixed up in normal PET bottle recycling chains?
So very good question as well. So there is a PRO now for compostable packaging. It is the Compostable Packaging Association of South Africa. It's headed up by somebody called John Fox. So their organization is the PRO. It's been relatively well received by the government because the Department of Environmental Affairs has agreed to recognize compostable packaging. And with there being between 17 and 20 companies buying and selling, trading and producing compostable packaging, we've needed a PRO. So it was really great that they came to the party with that. And so let's talk about waste stream contamination for a second, because I think sometimes it's something that's not properly looked at. So let's answer the first question is, can a compostable bottle contaminate the waste stream with PET bottles? Absolutely, yes. And people are kind of hoping for a better answer than that. There's not a better answer. It definitely contaminates the waste stream. But we need to remember something very important here. If we look at just bottles for a moment, your shampoo bottle is made of something called HDPE, high density polyethylene. Your tablet bottle that you get at the pharmacy is made out of polypropylene, PP. These are compostable, and then of course we've got glass bottles as well. Those different bottles are being separated already. HDPE, which is your typical shampoo bottle, is going to affect the waste stream. You can't have a tablet bottle, shampoo bottle, and a water bottle in the same waste stream. That has to be separated again. So we do already separate the different kinds of packaging into their respective streams, and from there it's processed. So, this is something that we've run past Petco. Petco in South Africa, if we're allowed to put it nicely, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but Petco is kind of the policeman, the watchdog about what's going on in terms of PET recycling. We have met with them. We use the labeling that they've wanted us to use. And then this is obviously a category 7 product. Category 7 meaning that it does not fall into the 6 categories of plastic which exist. And again, just on that note, realize that there are 6 categories of plastic, and one cannot contaminate the other. They have to be separated already. So again, in Europe and in certain first world countries, that separation is done automatically with infrared sorting technology. We do not have that technology in South Africa. In our waste management and waste systems, it's done by labor. And as long as the labeling is correct, then it is acceptable both by Petco, by the PROs, by the government. So that's the recycling code 7. And then there is also a compostable logo, which is the international compostable logo. So bottles would tend to need both of those. Something that we've also done here, and I don't know if you can see it that easily, on some of them we just put on there, I'm not plastic. I don't know if you can read that. But, also just to really scream home the message that this doesn't fall into the 6 categories of plastic. So with Petco satisfied with the labeling, and with those codes and symbols on the product, it's deemed acceptable.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nick. It's great to hear that Fortis X is working with sort of the PROs and companies like Petco, just to ensure that that there aren't too many unintended consequences from what could otherwise be a viable solution. You mentioned the branding that that it's marked as number 7, I believe you said, and also that it's marked compostable.
Yes.
I know in your presentation you mentioned BioPET as well. I'm assuming that would be bio-based, but not biodegradable.
Correct. So there's some customers that want bottles for reuse. So if you think, for example, in hotel rooms, they would like to have a natural source where the resin and product comes from, but they don't want it to break down. Another company that's very much that way inclined is Lego. So Lego have a vision that they want your children's children to play with the Lego that you bought, right? But if we cannot use the fossil reserves and we can use sustainable reserves to produce the product, then that's sort of the goal achieved.
Wonderful. And then do you have any plans to, I know you did speak briefly about the soft and flexible plastics and things like that, but do you have any sort of plans in the future to expand into other sectors of the plastic industry where contamination is already sort of a common practice? So not a common practice, but a common issue. So things like meat trays, things like that are often contaminated with food waste, and then add an additional step to the value chain in recycling. Are there any plans to expand to sort of production of those types of items?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, especially if there's commitment from consumers, we can do it. It is on an industrial scale. So, you know, if somebody wants 100 or 500 meat trays, unfortunately, that's not enough to justify the tooling costs. The tooling costs are extremely heavy. But there are consumers out there that are willing to do it. Certain companies that are moving in that direction. And you know, we really see the shock value come in when legislation changes. So when we started supplying the customers in Rwanda, that came as a result of change in legislation. Everybody panicked, didn't know what to do, and then started hunting around for the answer. So if there's no real pressure from government to change, and we're sort of just allowed to keep using fossil fuels well into the future with no implications or no repercussions, then people sort of feel, well, why bother, you know, is the sort of one side of the coin.
Of course. All right. I see we are getting relatively close to our end time at 1:45. So much for all the thorough questions that you've, the thorough answers that you've provided today. I think it sounds like a really promising sector that will hopefully grow a fair amount. And yeah, it certainly seems like with your closed loop system and the local import of biomaterial, that there's definitely a lot of promise there. Can I confirm, am I correct in thinking that about a week ago or so, there was a recent update in terms of South African legislation and bioplastics? I believe it was perhaps incorporating the PROs.
You know, so that has been a long process. And so the PRO is getting more and more exposure, more and more strength. In terms of what happened last week, I'm not too sure. Okay. We will check with John Fox and take a look what happened there. But yeah, it's definitely making some great leaps and strides.
Certainly, and I think it's really encouraging to hear to hear all the opportunities and the collaboration with industry and other and sort of existing extended producer responsibility organizations for plastic. I see there's one last question here that says, how does the material break down in the ocean and affect creatures?
Yeah, I thought we couldn't like not have that question because it's essential. So let me put it to you like this. There is not one miracle solution that just answers everything. For us to safely hold water in a bottle means that the bottle cannot break up in the presence of water, and then you're consuming bottle material, right? So it is shelf stable, it is polymerized, so it is very strong in its application for water, for juices, for certain cosmetic products. If it gets into the ocean, it's not going to break down. We cannot hold water safely in a bottle without it breaking up. And then when it gets into the ocean, it needs to sort of, am I allowed to say, magically disintegrate. The other argument is, oh, well, can't that happen over time? Like in 10 years' time, it could break down. It's still the same thing. So if you want a bottle that can just biodegrade in any environment, you'd almost have to make the bottle out of something like tissue paper. So, and I'm not trying to be funny or facetious or anything, but if it was made out of that, then it would break up anywhere. But then you would not have the strength that you require to hold the product that you want in it. So that's very unfortunate that it does not break down in a marine environment. But something that is encouraging, though, is with the cruise liners having incinerators on the ships, one certainly does not need to worry about that from that point of view. Bottles on a ship can be put into the incinerator and discarded immediately. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Nick. I'd just like to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Nick. It's great to hear about Fortis X, and we really appreciate your candor with your answers. As consumers, we also need to take responsibility for the waste that we produce and make sure that it ends up in the correct disposal.
Yeah, just because it can biodegrade does not mean it's a license to litter.
Certainly. And regardless of whether something is recyclable or compostable, things like that, it certainly doesn't belong in the environment, marine or otherwise. So always good to bear that in mind. So I think we can close off the session here for this afternoon.
Yeah, Tara, thank you again for having me on your program.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoons.